Hello and welcome to Shit I Wish Someone Told Me, a weekly series of educational conversations where my guest and I talk about all of the shit that we wish someone told us at one point or another so that you don't have to figure it out the hard way. I'm your host, John Renee, and I am an evidence-based life coach that specializes in teaching you how to help yourself by leaning into what works for you so that you can stop feeling like blah and start actually feeling good about who you are and knowing who that person actually is. Joining us today, we have Shanon Deyerle of power.place.purpose on Instagram. And what we're going to be talking about in this episode today is the quote unquote acceptable feelings. We are going to be specifically focusing on what they are. So if you heard that and you're like, aren't all feelings acceptable? We're going to talk about what we mean. And no, they are not. We are going to, they should be, but no, they are not. And we are going to talk about why those are the acceptable ones. We're going to talk about why it's a problem. And we're also going to give you some tools to show you what you can actually do about it if you recognize that as being something that is true for you. And our goal in this conversation is to normalize feeling what those feelings are underneath your initial reaction. And so we'll dive into what that means here in just a second. But what I want you to do as you are listening to this episode or watching this episode is I want you to think about what did you learn were the acceptable feelings as you were growing up? Were you allowed to cry? When there was conflict, did you see people fighting and throwing things and screaming at one another? Or did you see them not talking at all and going to, separate ends of the house or room and just like not having any conversations about it? Did you see them having a conversation about it? I want you to think about what are the feelings and responses and reactions that you witnessed as not only being told what was okay and what you are, supposed to quote unquote do in those types of situations, but what are the things that you learned, whether you were present to it or not, were what was considered normal. So think about that as we're moving through this today. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to our guest. So Shanon is a therapeutic coach. She combines her master's degree in counseling with her life coach certification to help clients reach their goals. Shanon focuses on self-love as a foundational piece for growth and change because she's experienced firsthand the difference loving, accepting, and valuing yourself makes in your life. When you work with Shanon, you can expect a safe place to explore and challenge your beliefs and lots of practical ways to get you where you want to be. And I can attest to that. That is all very true. You can find her online at powerplacepurpose.com or on Instagram at power.place.purpose. And we are so glad that you are here. You're no stranger to the show, and we have lots of good episodes coming up. And I am super excited to dive into this one with you. Is there anything else that you would like to add or mention before we get started?
I, first of all, want to thank you for always having me. These conversations are always useful and invigorating for me and exciting to feel like we're connecting and sharing with people who need it. So thank you for that, as always. And no, I just want to, I love that we're talking about acceptable. Please know, everyone, that's in quotes, right? Because it's not that there is only a set that's acceptable. It's that there's all these messages we receive from our growing up and in our places in our worlds that say, this is allowed and this isn't. So that's what we're getting ready to dig into. And I think it's really important.
I am so excited. We have done our preliminary talk and I can't wait to share. So yeah, thank you for adding that and setting us up really well for the conversation we're about to have. So let's kick it off.
Do it. Yeah.
Shanon, what is some shit you or someone told you about the acceptable feelings?
Oh, so much, so much. As always, when you ask me a question about the topic, there's always so much. I think that, first of all, everyone comes from their own place, their own experience. And so what I learned as a kid and as a person growing up in the world I inhabited, there were things that I was taught about what's acceptable, right? And that everyone else, because they have their own unique experiences, learned very potentially different things about those things. And that when someone has their set of experiences and I have mine and they don't match, that I don't have to feel bad about that or confused by that. That's just the way of the world. Um, and also that our feelings, gosh, I could talk about feelings forever, but that our reactions to things, they are really, really important. They're giving us information. And so if we box them up into only a few specific places, we're not going to get all the information we need. So this is, yes, this is an important topic. This is a really significant thing that we do to ourselves, but we all do it because our society is built this way. And guess what? It's not, it's
Mhm.
normal. It's normal. So it's not, we'll talk about a serious thing, but we don't have to feel bad about it. Like we don't have to drag ourselves down.
Right.
Yeah, those are the two main things. What about you?
I love that. Thank you for that preface. And that, yeah, like I think a lot of times, and we'll talk more about this, like we feel we have to show up in a certain way and that like it's this very heavy thing. And so it's like we can't address the elephant in the room. And so I'm really hoping to normalize like
Mm-hmm.
looking behind the curtain, if you will, going underneath the surface. And that's something that you spoke about. And for me, some shit I wish someone told me about the acceptable feelings, the quote unquote acceptable feelings, are that there's something more. And this is the reason why I had this conversation with you, is because you had mentioned that in one of our other conversations, because I was like, oh, she knows too. Like she's present to it. And so I think that's a really powerful thing, because acceptable feelings are things like anger, frustration, resentment, right? Because if we see someone who is feeling any one of those things, it's like, oh, well, they're pissed. Like, let's stay out of their way, or like they're pissed, like as they should be, kind of a thing. And I'm not saying that like you shouldn't ever feel these things, but I'm saying that these are usually the surface reactions that we have. Sometimes we can also have surface reactions like sadness, right? Like we can start crying if someone, um, you know, causes us to feel sad. And what I think is important, and some shit I wish someone told me about this, is that what you talk about a lot, that there is so much more underneath that, underneath the anger, frustration, resentment, sadness, these things that we usually, think of whenever we think of like, well, this is, how I feel, like my go-to response. There's often really so many other emotions that are so much more telling of the actual situation.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so much, those are the things that we actually need to understand in order to move past and move through and process what
Yeah.
this experience is. And those can be feelings like hurt, rejection, fear, abandonment, loss, regret, grief, these things that, like, even as I say them, like I know that this is true for me, and I'm curious if it's true for any of our listeners or viewers. But like, even as I say those, it's like, ugh, like, like
Yeah.
those are the ones that like I don't want to feel those. Like I can feel pissed, like
Yes.
that's fine. And so I really thought it was important to talk about this. And one of the things that I have been present to for a while, and I remember I had this realization years ago, is people get so reactive to like sporting events, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they get so
Mm-hmm.
angry and like caught up in it. And we get it. It's like, oh, it's their team. Like, oh, we give them a pass, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I think that at some point, in my time, some shit I wish someone told me, is that that overreaction is actually only taking place because it's not acceptable for them to express everything that's underneath that. So the frustration
Mm-hmm.
that they have in their relationships, at work, finances, and their sense of self and who they are and what they're doing,
Mm-hmm.
their purpose, like in this existence, all of that stuff is not allowed or permitted or
Mm-hmm.
encouraged to be spoken about. And so it's something where when we have an opportunity to, you know, get that out in some way, then we're often going to do it. And that's why, it's, I feel, something where it comes out in an overreacted way, because so much is up underneath there. That's why people get
Yeah.
so pissed when a car cuts them off. I mean, like,
Mm-hmm.
yes, like your safety is in danger, but like, let's, or your safety is in jeopardy, but at the same time, like, not always, like
Yes. Not to the
people.
extent of your response.
Right.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
it's always telling to me when I see people have such strong reactions to things that I don't want to say are meaningless, but things that, don't necessarily, like in the grand scheme of things, really warrant that type of response, because that to me is telling and indicative of a lot of other stuff.
Yes. Yes. And you made me think of two things when you were talking. One was when we talk about acceptable, right? Which I'm going to keep doing this, even though I don't mean to. Doing my air quotes.
Yeah.
I think one of the things we're referring to is that it's safe in some way to use the descriptor or the reaction that we've seen before.
Yes.
People understand that from us.
Yes.
So a person being mad at a sporting event or reactive at someone cutting them off in traffic is enough of a reaction to get the emotional release
Yes.
that someone might need, that is also safe enough in whatever role they play or the context they're in to just have that be enough and have that be the thing that happens. And what you're saying is that there's so much more, and I agree with you. There can be so much more going on underneath, but unless we give ourselves a moment to pause and say, wow, like, why was I so pissed at that person who cut me off?
Yeah.
Or, someone checking in with you and saying, wow, like that didn't seem like as upsetting to me as it was to you. What's going on?
Yeah.
We're just going to stay up here because maybe that's what we learned. Surface is safe.
Yeah. Yeah. As you were speaking, I got reminded of another example, and it is that like whenever, like you said, there's always like something underneath. There's usually something underneath. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
like when you think of like couples fighting, it's not about the dishes.
Right.
There's something else. It's that it's easier to bitch about the dishes and to get
Mm-hmm.
mad about that than it is to say, it really hurts me that we don't spend time together anymore. It really hurts me that you like forgot my birthday, or I
Mm-hmm.
really feel abandoned when you make time for your friends but not to take me on a date. Like those things aren't as easy for us to share. And I think that that's, twofold. Like you said, like we are creatures of mimicry, and that's how we learn. And so we haven't necessarily seen that behavior modeled to us ever before, but also kind of along the same lines of that, it's uncomfortable, and like we don't know how to do it. So first of all, we haven't
Yeah.
seen it, we don't know how to do it, and then secondly, it's uncomfortable. And so,
Yes.
let's talk a little bit about, now that we are aware of what we're talking about in terms of like the quote unquote acceptable
Mm-hmm.
feelings, and how those can show up. Why is it that we exhibit some feelings over others?
Well, I think you just touched on that ball, got that ball rolling for us, because it's not just what we saw as the way to express something, right? It's also what the people around us have learned they know how to process as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we're constantly, as human beings, in a society in which we are interacting with other people and places and jobs and responsibilities all the time, getting feedback, right, on how we're showing up and how we're communicating and who we are. So we have roles that we play, and in those roles, right, maybe we have certain expectations of how we're supposed to be, right? Women, mothers,
Mm-hmm.
professionals, whatever the case may be. And then there's people who are in the corresponding roles: family members, parents, coworkers, children, spouses, partners, whatever they may be. And they have their whole set of experiences and sets of feedback. And so everywhere we turn, we're getting messages about what people can tolerate, what makes us connected, what
Right.
creates disconnection, and then therefore we make our decisions from there about what we do with what we're feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. That was something that you mentioned in our preliminary talk about this conversation. And I had a moment where I was like, oh shit, you're right.
Yeah.
Because the way that most of us grew up was in an environment where, if something was wrong, what do? We go to our rooms and we don't talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And while granted, we might need time to step away, like collect my thoughts, like calm myself down,
Mm-hmm.
self-regulate in that
Mm-hmm.
way, my experience was that we didn't usually revisit it, or I didn't see it
Mm-hmm.
like revisited. That might
Yeah.
have happened behind closed doors, but like I didn't see that. And so it's something where, yeah, it wasn't that I don't want to be in communication about what happened, and supporting that person in a way that they need when they're going through something, when they're feeling these feelings that I'm not personally comfortable with. It's that, like, I didn't have the tools to navigate it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so I think when we are speaking in that regard, like I said, it's something that no one taught us how to.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
easier, for us to just bury it and distract from it. And something that I wanted to also talk about in this part is because it doesn't support big businesses' bottom line for us to actually be in communication and connection, and to actually process these emotions and feelings and get underneath what we're actually feeling. Because what supports big businesses' bottom line is distracting, right? Teaching us
Mm.
that, like, if you drink and party, like, look at how fun that is. If you smoke, like, that's so cool. And whenever we are in that environment, like, we're benefiting their bottom line, and we're just getting ourselves caught in this perpetual loop of distraction and numbing, where
Mm-hmm.
we are like on the merry-go-round, and we're like, oh, I see my problems, but look,
Mm-hmm.
now I'm around the other turn.
Right.
It's
Right.
gone now. I don't see
Right.
it again. And then, we get back to that point where, like, oh, right, my problems are still there. Oh, but let me have another cigarette or another drink, or watch some more
Yeah.
porn, or
Yeah.
whatever the case may be. When, what they don't tell us is that, so for example, smoking, the act of smoking itself is essentially teaching you how to regulate your breath, which impacts your vagus nerve, because it's a slow inhale and a slow exhale, which, if you just
Mm-hmm.
do that, that is regulating your central nervous system, like, through breathing. But when it's compounded with the fact that you are getting these different chemicals and substances that are literally addicting you to it, not only are you addicted to the action, but you are also addicted to the chemicals within that. And that benefits big businesses' bottom line. People don't smoke cigarettes because they want to get cancer, or, like, fuck up their lungs.
No.
They smoke cigarettes because they want a relief from the stress that they are feeling. That's typically the same reason that people drink, or, watch porn, to experience. And I'm just using those three examples. Like, there are other examples, but we're just
Yeah.
using those three because I think those are common ones we've all probably, exercised in some degree
Mm-hmm.
or capacity
Yeah.
or another.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, whenever we are in the position where we are, like I said, just distracting, then it's something where we're not served, but, like, someone else's pockets are being lined at our expense. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that that's important to bring up, because it's something that we it just exemplifies why we were taught to not actually feel the feelings, because, like, whenever you're doing these other things, like, you can't, right? Like, you're in an altered
Mm-hmm.
state, like, you are getting that fix, if you will, in another way. And so it's like, well, I don't need to, because I'm not feeling that thing anymore. And so then we don't
Right.
feel the thing anymore, because, also, by the way, research has shown that it is physically uncomfortable for you to feel your feelings and emotions, just as it is, for you to experience physical pain. So, not that the brain processes it in the same way, I'm not saying that, but that they are felt to, like, the same degree of hurt
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
of pain and discomfort.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I think that's really important to acknowledge, that the drive and the internal desire to find relief from the pain that comes from the feelings that we don't, the emotions, the responses, the reactions that we don't have an outlet for. That is natural. That
Yeah.
is good, right? That is an instinct that you should follow. And I don't use the word should lightly. I hate that word. No one should ever feel like they have to do anything. But if you're feeling that drive, know that that's yourself saying, I need to feel better, and you are allowed to feel better. And
Yeah.
we're not bashing getting together with people and hanging out with the people you care about and having drinks and, doing whatever it is for fun. But we're just trying to point out that there are other things at play here that may be derailing you from the relief that that experience could offer you,
Yeah.
right? So looking at it from that lens, I think, could be helpful. And saying to yourself, am I drinking? Am I smoking? Am I watching porn? Am I doing anything else because I feel like shit and I don't know what to do about it? Or am I out doing this thing because I really enjoy it and I'm connecting with my friends and we're having an experience, and the next day you wake up and you still feel the relief from that, as opposed to that emotional hangover as much as potentially a physical one.
Yeah. And something that you mentioned as well is that whenever we do these things, whenever we go out for drinks with friends, whenever we, take part in smoke breaks, we are actually surrounding ourselves with community, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're actually experiencing a connection. And that, as you know, I talk about this probably every episode. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We
Yeah.
need love and belonging before we can experience feelings of self-esteem and self-actualization. That's not me saying like, oh, you should connect with people. Like you need
Yeah,
love and
we
belonging.
do. We are biologically built to be living in tribes, in connection. We physically and emotionally need each other. That's just how we're made.
Yeah.
It's just who we are. Yeah.
And so what you pointed out was that these outlets, these distractions, as I'm referring to them as, could also be a way of us, like you said, like we're meeting our needs. It just might not
Yes.
be in the most effective way in the long run. It
Mm-hmm.
might be something where, it works for now. Like I said, like we're on the merry-go-round, like it makes me feel safe for now. I got out of the discomfort. But if it's
Mm-hmm.
something where we never return to it, we're not building resilience. We're just running from our problems. And we are
Right.
just leaning into like the anger and the surface level, like you said, the frustration, like the sadness, like the annoyance, the whatever those like for surface level things are, because it's what we were taught. And whenever we go out in these groups to smoke or to use drugs or to drink or whatever the case may be, um, then we are meeting that need for connection. But
Mm-hmm.
what's true for me in my experience is that I used to drink a lot from like 14 to like early to mid 20s.
Mm-hmm.
And it was one day where I was like, you know what? I don't think that I like this so much. And so I had to do
Mm-hmm.
some R&D on myself. I say, life is all just R&D, research and development, where I was like, exactly like what you said. Am I doing this? Am I going out and drinking because I enjoy it? Or am I
Right.
doing it because that's what I think I'm supposed to do?
Yes, yes. And that goes back to what we were talking about before, which is in our worlds, right? We're getting feedback. We're put in roles. We have responsibilities. We have as much as we like to be drivers of our own destiny, a lot of our experiences until we're out on our own are not necessarily driven by our own desires, right? And so
Right.
we learn all along to people please or say yes to things or try new things or whatever it is, and then we get roped into a role, or we get roped into a an identity,
Right.
or you know and it's not always bad, but I'm just saying there are likely moments where you have that exact question. Like, am I doing this because I really want to, or because I've just always done it this way? Or someone's always said, this is who I am.
A
And
client,
that's your inner self that's like, yoo-hoo, hi, I'm not okay in here.
yes. A client literally today said that they think that they're going to step away from drinking because it's not really serving them right now.
Yeah, yeah,
And they're like, LOL. So I don't know what happened yet. We didn't get to that part, but I think that, yeah, it's exactly like what you said. I think that we all, I don't want to say all, but I think that a lot of us arrive at this point, because that's not the first client. I've had clients before ask me as well, like, how did you stop drinking? Like, what
mm-hmm,
was that like? Which, hell, that might
mm-hmm,
be a whole episode in and of itself, because
yeah,
um I mean, Jonna was a drinker. So
me
uh
too.
yeah, yeah. So this isn't to like shame anyone for anything, but it's
No,
just to say that, yeah, like this is an invitation to invite you to ask yourself, not only as you listen to this, what emotions and feelings, excuse me, did you learn were acceptable, but also like, are you actually enjoying doing the things that you're doing? Because
right,
it oftentimes happens where we don't ask ourselves these questions until it gets really bad,
yes,
until like shit really hits the fan. And
yes,
so it doesn't have to, get to the point of a, let's breakdown, breakthrough, whatever you want to call it.
Mm-hmm.
It can be you just right here and right now asking yourself, do I enjoy doing the things that I'm doing? Doesn't even have to be drinking or smoking or
Yeah.
drugs or anything else.
Yes,
Just,
exactly. Because we
whatever it
can
is that you do.
exactly. And this is what I want to remind people of. I always tell my clients this too, is when we're asking those questions, right? And when we're investigating, we're doing our R&D.
Mm-hmm.
I really encourage you to please just come from a place of curiosity.
Yes.
Okay. Just pretend it's like someone you've never met before in your entire life when
That's
you're
funny.
talking to
Yeah.
yourself. Right. And you just say, how's that working? Like, how does that
Yeah.
feel? What is that about? Do not judge yourself in those questions, because when you do, you tamp down, you
Mm-hmm.
push away the
Mm-hmm.
real response that
Yes.
needs to come out. So when we're curious, we naturally avoid the temptation of judgment. And that's just a nugget from me to you. When you start getting those questions to pop up, just dig into the possibility, because everyone everyone every day is doing their best. You do not need to judge yourself
Yeah.
for something you may want or need to change.
Yeah. I love that. The power of curiosity. And
Hmm.
yeah, I tell my clients to put on the researcher hat. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
so yeah, I love that. Like pretend like it's, not you. It's just if you were watching like Oz, right? Like if you were all
Hmm.
knowing, like omnipotent, like omnipotent, like whatever, um,
Hmm.
point of view, like what would you think? Like what would you say? What would you feel? So yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
One of the other things you said whenever we were on this topic is that, we're driven to connect, but that there are rules around how people want to have that happen. Right. And so I
Yes.
think that that speaks to what we were saying about like go out to bars, because we see like, the advertisements, like it looks so cool. Look at the people having fun and dancing
Hmm.
with their alcohol and their whatever. And we get
Hmm.
celebrity endorsements and all this stuff. And if you're not mindful of that, like that's subconscious programming,
Right.
period.
Yeah. Yeah. You're drawn to the things that look like they're gonna feel good.
Yes.
We're
Yes.
all drawn to those things.
Yeah.
That's why I look at sparkly jewelry in the store when I don't freaking need it, right? Like, or, I mean, or we want the beautiful pastry in the case rather than, the bowl of high fiber cereal, right? Like
Right.
whatever it is, that is human nature too,
Right.
right? Is to find things that make us feel good. That's we want a reward. We want the dopamine. This is all science. It's all kind of how we're wired and what systems are at play here. So you don't have to like feel bad for that.
Yeah.
Um, and at the same time, know that there are plenty of ways, right, to connect. And some of what we're talking about today is opening our eyes up to, while the world might say this is all you need,
Mm-hmm.
your inner self is saying there's so much more happening and we can get to those needs too. And
Yeah.
that's really allowed.
Yes. And yeah, I love all of everything that you say, but particularly in that most recent thought, it's yeah, this isn't to make you feel bad or anything like that, which I already said, but people now have, and by people I mean marketers, have the intelligence that they are able to
Hmm.
tap into our biology, to tap into the science of how our brains and bodies work, so that they can leverage that to sell shit to you, to
Yeah.
again impact their bottom line. And so I'm not bashing, but I'm saying this to invite you to get curious, invite you to have an awareness, invite you to say, like, oh, like you said, like they show us ads that, give us, that make us feel something, that make us say,
Yes.
like, oh, if I drink this alcohol, then I'm going to feel happy and have fun like all these people. And that's not, the exact message that they're saying, but that is the message that they are sending. And so I'm
Mm.
saying this to invite you to, yeah, just get curious and become aware, like be smarter, right? Like this is what I teach my clients, like be smarter than society expects you to be, because
Mm.
they're keeping you busy so that you don't have time to think about this shit. That's the importance of, one of the important parts of being alone, which is episode 50, where Josh Black and I talk about that. And I highly recommend you check
Hmm.
out that episode, because we talk about how being alone can also be uncomfortable.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
that
Yeah.
plays into our conversation today, where, it's, let's think about being alone for a minute. That's not really accepted either, right? Like, if you're alone, like, that's weird. Why are you a loner? Like, is something wrong with you? Does no one want to hang out with you? Like,
Mhm.
why don't you want to be around people? Like, do you not have friends? Like,
Mhm.
do you hate everyone? And so that too is something that isn't necessarily considered as being acceptable. And so, yeah, inviting you to, yeah, just get
Yes.
curious about all that, and to, um, let's talk about this right now. So something that Shanon mentioned is that, invite you to get curious about, like, what you actually want and why you want that thing. Um,
Mhm.
but like Shanon mentioned, it's advantageous to society as a whole to tell us to not feel our feelings. And so would you please explain, like, what you meant whenever you said that?
Whew, okay, so it's advantageous to society as a whole for us not to feel our feelings
Yeah.
because feelings are messy.
Yep.
feelings feelings can derail the whole plan, and they can put a system
Mm-hmm.
that likes things to be working a certain way out of whack. That's sort of the main idea. So if you take that idea of a system, we can apply it to a bunch of things. Families are systems, workplaces are systems, restaurants are systems. Um, even just friend groups are systems. Relationships in all these different iterations are parts of these systems. Okay. And so when we are working on our relationship with ourself and we start listening to the needs that are underneath the surface stuff that we've always been allowed to express or felt safe to express, um, and that other people are used to hearing from us, when we change that setup, guess what happens? Everything changes around us. And nobody likes change. Even the people who love you the most and want you to be happy struggle with how to respond to you when you start to change. It doesn't mean they won't ultimately like get it, right? And support you and know how to interact in a new way. But that's part of what happens. And that's part of what we intuitively pick up on and maybe keeps us in our existing place.
Yeah.
Even when we feel a disconnect inside, even when we have repercussions that come from not really being genuine or deep enough with what we're reacting to and what we're feeling. The the surface, and we keep referring to it this way, and I don't want it to seem like I'm downplaying. I'm not saying you are a superficial person being on the surface here. What I'm saying is what's available to us up here, up top, may be hiding other things, like the iceberg, right, that sunk the
Mm-hmm.
Titanic. And if we're holding all of this stuff underneath and we're not allowing it to rise to the surface, there is tension. And we'll talk about that in a little bit about what's the cost here, right, of not allowing the reality of what's going on for us to translate into new ways of expressing. Um, but all of that is to say, that's what I think about the question you asked, that there, that the way it's just always worked is working
Yep.
in air quotes, even though it really isn't functional necessarily.
Oof. Yes. It's working even though it isn't functional. Yeah. That is so true. There is a full ass disconnect between who we
Mm-hmm.
were told to be and, who we actually are a lot of times.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
something that you had mentioned as well is that, we are sold into these different roles, right? We're told,
Mm-hmm.
not to be bitchy or not to be, difficult. And so therefore we, like you said, put ourselves in these positions where we aren't comfortable, we aren't empowered, we aren't allowed to
Mm-hmm.
feel what's really happening, because we're told that we have to be a certain way. And
Mm-hmm.
we did a whole last episode 47, the cost of not feeling your feelings. But
Mm-hmm.
that's one of the things that happens when, like you said, like we are put in these roles to like be prim and proper and nice and polite. And like you said, like if we start to rock the boat, then it's like, oh, like she's a troublemaker, or oh, like he's an asshole, or whatever the case may be.
Right.
When that's not the case, like that could just be someone who's very self-aware and who is very comfortable expressing what's actually going on. And it could be that we just don't have the tools to receive that. And
Yes.
that's not to say there aren't assholes and bitches, right? Like that's not, I'm not saying that there's not any of that going on. So I want to be clear, but I want to also point out that, you know, the eye is, you know, in the, or like what we see is what we are looking at based on our experience. And so oftentimes, you know, the truth is, I say this, what we believe it to be, but oftentimes you have to be careful because you might find that you are lying to yourself. You might
Yeah.
be telling yourself that this is actually true when that could just be your confirmation bias wanting you to be right, which no harm, no foul, like, or no shade.
Mm-hmm.
That's just your brain doing its job. We want to be right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That ensures certainty and safety. And at the same time, it's something where you have to be secure enough in who you are to know, hey, I'm not always right, and that's okay. And let me rise above and get curious, right?
Right.
Like we have these developed brains, we have all this awareness, you have all this information available at your very fingertips for a reason. And, you know, you can do what you want with it. But my encouragement here is that you actually do it to, like I said, rise above the bullshit that they're trying to sell you, rise above, you know, looking at things from one point of view, rise above, you know, just doing things like you've always done because that's like what you've always done. Which shout out to mine and Josh's episode 62, like, are you addicted to a past version of yourself? All the shout outs today. Because like we have so much more potential, and it oftentimes comes from processing the feelings that are under those initial reactions. And so
Yes.
that I think is a good segue into our conversation on cost. Like, what's the harm in only expressing these acceptable feelings? And like I said, I kind of segued to one, like, you know,
Yeah.
we have more potential. But what else? Like, what else would you say is harmful about only expressing the quote unquote acceptable feelings and not getting to the stuff underneath there?
Well, I mean, there's so many things, but I'll touch on two that I think are really significant, and then
Mm,
I'll throw it back your way. You know, the first thing is kind of obvious, and it is that you're keeping yourself, and we referred to this a little bit at the beginning. You're keeping yourself in a place where you're only looking at certain parts of your experience. When you say, I am so angry that so and so did that to me, and that's where you stay,
mhm.
if you and that anger is lingering for days and days and days, that is your sign that there's more going on than just anger, right? And usually there are things underneath that we are challenged to identify because we don't know what they are, right? We didn't learn them. There's also things that we struggle to acknowledge because we think maybe we're not allowed to because of the roles we play, right? And then there's the whole way of like sharing it and getting it out, which maybe feels really scary in the relationships and the places we're in, because the feedback we've gotten is when you do that one little thing, oh, no, 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 we don't like that. It doesn't work for us.
Right.
So you've got all that working against you. All of that is to say, when you do have the opportunity to go underneath what is present to you and persisting, you may find things like hurt, fear, disappointment, rejection, the deeper stuff that's saying to you the needs that you have, the things you value, and the person you are that isn't being seen, that isn't being acknowledged, isn't being valued.
Yeah.
And those are the moments in which the deepest, most beautiful connections and relationships can be created. So you're preserving one type of experience, which is okay to do, don't get me wrong, but you're preserving that in lieu of something that might be richer and more powerful and more authentic to you.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that's happening is there's a physical reaction in ourselves, right? Um, you know, studies have shown over and over, right, that our bodies are responding to the input and the experiences we're having as much as our emotions are. And so when we are trapping energy in our body, which is part of what this experience is we're talking about, we are causing all sorts of physical stress on our body.
Yeah.
And we can have headaches, we can have increased risks of cancer, we can have stomach problems, we can have inflammation, stress, I mean, insomnia, overeating, over drinking, things to manage what those feelings are. I mean, I could go down a list, but there is a physical toll that we put on ourselves when we don't allow that energy to be acknowledged and released.
Yeah. Yeah. And thank you for sharing that. That's something that you reminded me of earlier when we were talking about like the ways in which we distract, and the fact that we feel like the quote unquote acceptable feelings. It's because, to piggyback off of what you shared, um it's oftentimes where, talking about like the marketers and how like they know how to like use our brain, we are in such a state of stress that
Mhm.
we don't even realize it. Like stress is our
Yes,
version of normal right now. And
yes.
so when we are talking about feeling these things that we aren't quite sure how to feel, these emotions, or excuse me, these feelings under the feelings, then it can oftentimes be something where like there's uncertainty, right? Because we
Mhm.
don't know how to do it, and that's scary. And it could also be something where like we just don't have the capacity to, because there's so much other stuff, right?
Yes,
Because
yes,
we are at such a lowered state already, because we aren't
yeah.
getting enough sleep, because our body isn't doing all of its systems that it needs to do every night to like clear the sludge, if you will, from your brain, which
Mhm.
has been
Mhm.
scientifically researched. That's like one of the importance of getting like good deep sleep. And when we find ourselves, to take it back to what we were saying earlier with the different types of environments, whether that be drinking or drugs or whatever else, we then too are finding connection within that altered state, right? So like we're already at an altered state, we're compromising ourselves in substances, and so like that then also is us not being our authentic selves, simply because like, I mean, I'm not saying that you're not being authentic in that state, but I'm saying like you are not you, because you are under some sort of an influence in those
Mhm.
situations, and so is the
Mhm.
other person. So even if you do experience a connection, it's kind of like a facade. Like it's not one that it's me to you, like no like external stuff like
Mhm.
interfering with this. And that can also be a cost, because I always talk about, us not being our true selves. It's because we don't have the opportunity to even figure out who that is,
Mhm.
because we are in such a state of disarray in other areas, always
Yeah.
being stressed, like not having the time, like being burnout and exhausted, experiencing
Yeah.
anxiety, because we have all
Yeah.
these other stressors. Like, I mean, we can go down that rabbit hole, but we'll save that for another day. When it comes to, just the overwhelm and influx of information that we have to process.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
when you look at our evolution, we have done leaps and bounds in the past 100 years as opposed to the previous like 2 million years. And
Mhm.
so it's something where we have to take a pause and consider what's actually serving me, like what's actually important. Because while society wants you to think like be a boss and do it all, you can't. Like,
And PS, if everyone wants to be boss and do it all, then how are we working together actually?
yeah,
Like, not everyone can be in charge
yeah,
on everything. Like, so how about if we tune into the things that we're feeling and the things that we value? And like you said, because that's what this conversation is, Jana, I think, is about how do we get to our true self?
yeah,
Because the reactions we're having and the experiences that are giving us those reactions are telling us something.
yep,
And if we're not listening to those things, then we're missing something that really is important about who we really are.
yeah,
And what that might say is, I don't want to be in charge of the the thing at work that everyone wants me to be in charge of. I actually want to just be one of the people on the committee who helps make it all happen. But you know what I really care about, right? I
Mhm.
get excited when I get to talk to so and so about this new idea I
Right.
have. And those are the moments that you feel the flow. You
Yep.
feel an ease, right? You feel a lightness because you're allowing the energy to go. So it's a physical flow and you're following that into action.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's really important. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the cost of, not allowing yourself to feel all the feelings and only feeling the acceptable ones are, yeah, like you can put yourself at an altered state physically.
Hmm.
Um, something that you mentioned is, disease and chronic illness.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wanted to share that it changed my perception of disease when I heard, and I don't know who said it. Someone let us know who it was.
Yeah.
Disease pronounced as dis-ease.
Yeah.
We are dis-easy with ourself,
Yeah.
and we don't have to be.
Yeah. 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 And another thing that I wanted to mention as a cost of this is when you don't take the time to figure out what it is that's actually happening, like you said, like the anger isn't going to go away. Like it's just going to
Right.
be like your default. That's going to be your go-to. And, people are like, oh, well, like, why do I, fly off the handle and get so frustrated? Like, this is something that clients ask me. And I'm like, well, it's because there's more. Like something that
Right.
I said to a client recently is that, people are playing roles in our lives and it's up to us to figure out what that role or what that character says about like who we are and how we react, right?
Mm.
Like it's not
Hmm.
necessarily about them, it's
Hmm.
about you.
Yeah.
And again, like that sounds somewhat, contradictory when we say that, we need people, but also we need people that are going to challenge you and trigger you in these ways so that you can learn more about yourself, so that you
Hmm.
can go through those, deeper emotions and feelings and understand what it is it's actually triggering that so that you can
Hmm.
understand that so that you can choose differently next time and see if that
Hmm.
works better. See if that moves the needle closer to where it is that you want to be. But before you can do that, you need to know who you are and where that is. But that's, another conversation. Right now, we're just talking about getting to the root of those feelings. And
Yeah.
when we
Yeah.
don't take time to actually deal with those, they end up, like you said, not only just sticking around, but also
Hmm.
coming up later. Like I said, going back to that
Right.
merry-go-round analogy, it's something where like we see it, but if we're like, I'm not going to look at it right now, granted, sometimes it might not be safe to. That's okay. You don't have to look at it
Hmm.
right then and there. But if you never get off the merry-go-round and go like poke at it and, figure out like why was this my response, then it's
Hmm.
something where you are just going to continue to carry it around
Yeah.
and it's just going to get heavier and heavier because if you're not dealing with one thing, you're just continuously picking up more shit. Like you're
Right.
putting more things in the pile, so like you might still be going around on your distraction merry-go-round, but like that pile over there is going to be growing.
Right. Because you're still walking through the world every day,
Yeah.
right? You're still showing up to your job and in your relationships and in your family, and you're still being the person you are.
Yeah.
And so all of the things that you manage and all of just the base level stress and responsibility is still pushing at your system's limits anyway.
Yep.
You
Yep.
know, it doesn't just go away. That all stays. Everyone knows, oh my gosh. I mean, that's why on the weekend, if you work like Monday through Friday, that's why on Saturday you're like, oh my God.
Yep.
Right? I'm so tired. So, and that's without any drama or stress or triggers.
Yeah.
So yeah, just to validate that. And I want to say too, I think it's interesting. Um, if we can acknowledge this for some of us, right? And we touched on this a little, the acceptable emotion, a lot of us, enraged, angry. Um, in my experience, that was a completely unacceptable emotion. Completely. You could not be mad. So what I learned was acceptable was sad. So I had to learn that when I was sad, I was actually a whole lot of other things.
Yeah.
And so I want people, as they're listening to this, they hear angry and they're maybe not, identifying with that. Just know that replace that, right, with the thing that you learned was okay.
Yeah.
Just a little reminder, because it's interesting. It hit me in that moment. I was like, I never got mad. And if I got mad, I got in trouble.
Yeah.
Only certain people were allowed to be mad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, so whatever that emotion is that you have thought of, that we asked you to, whatever those feelings, excuse me, were, that we asked you to consider, you learned as acceptable. Um, insert that. I'm using
Yes.
anger personally because that was my go-to.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, no one told me it was okay. It was just what felt okay for me.
Yes. Yes.
And
That's another important point too. And maybe it wasn't that someone taught that to you, but it was just that that was the thing that that you knew to do that made sense. And that then the feedback in your environment said, oh, we can handle this from Jonna. That's
yeah,
okay.
yeah, because it's okay. So exactly. And to give you an example of what anger meant to me, whenever I act angry, people would leave me alone. People would leave me alone, and
Mm.
therefore I didn't have to worry about them disappointing me. I didn't have to worry about them hurting me. I didn't have to worry about them abandoning me if they were never there in the first place. So I got very angry. Yeah. To
Yeah.
safeguard, because that was safer to me than the potential of being rejected or abandoned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Yeah.
And if you went back to those moments, right, and you said to yourself, Jonna, your anger makes sense, but tell me more about what's underneath. What do you think would have been under there?
Look, this is coaching in real time. This was not planned. Um, Rejection, hurt, sadness, abandonment, loneliness, um, confusion.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And all
Longing
those
for connection.
longing. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so in a lot of our expressions of the thing, we're taking care of ourselves too. We're meeting other needs,
Yeah.
right? And those are the needs that are screaming for attention in the moment. And please, like, thank you for sharing that, Jonna, because I think that's so important. And we
Yeah. I
haven't said
almost
this
started crying.
yet.
I was like, mm-mm.
Yeah, I know. Like, and I'm so, like, forgive me if I went too deep there, but
No,
I
no, it's
think
fine. It's good. It's good. It's a good
that's,
example. Like this
yeah,
life. This is what we mean when we say it's messy.
yeah,
Like, yeah.
yeah. Because you didn't know how to dig into those things that were underneath.
Yeah.
You didn't know. And it was really, really scary,
Yeah.
right?
I mean,
That
hell, it's
was
uncomfortable
risking.
now. I was
I
like,
know.
woo, woo,
Right? It's a
woo.
big risk. It's a big risk. So, like, give yourself grace, everyone, as you're getting curious and as you're looking at what's underneath the stuff you normally share. Um, because those things are gonna make you feel some kind of way.
Yeah.
And they're gonna be uncomfortable to dig into. That's normal too.
Yeah.
Just get curious about what they are so that you can figure out, even without expressing them, what are they telling you,
Yeah.
right? Those things you just expressed, the resentment, the fear, the rejection, the longing, those were telling you it was missing.
I mean, did I even say resentment? That's on there too. That's in there
You
too.
did. You did. I think you did. We can go back and listen.
I was like, well, if not, from previous conversations. So yeah. That's
Right?
probably that's in there too. Um,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yeah. And thank you for this real-time example and for sharing what you just did. I also want to point out to anyone listening and watching that while it was easy, I mean, it seemed easy for me to just spit it out, like this is what I'm saying. It
Mm-hmm.
likely will not come that easily for you if you have never done this before. I
Yeah.
have been doing this type of work and like self excavation, and I'm not by any means saying I'm better than anyone else. I'm saying that
Yeah.
this is a skill that I have developed. And
Yes.
so
You've
you can
practiced it.
exactly
Yeah.
just like working out. Like you don't go into the gym and bang out, 50 push-ups. Like you have to train for that.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
same thing. Like I've been in training to be able to, you know, articulate that in that way. And so I don't want anyone to be like, oh, well, like it came easy or like feeling kind of way about yourself.
Yeah.
And yeah, I want to point it out just because I think that that's important, because I think part of the whole self-help, narrative that we see now, it's like, oh, well, if I just do this thing, then I'll feel better. And
Right.
the
Right.
examples that we see, well, granted, we have more access to people be more authentic and like crying and like things of that nature, which also, dear God, some people are just crying for show. But it's something where I think we aren't advised that, like, well, this didn't just happen. Like,
Right.
same thing with like whenever you see the workouts, and I relate it to fitness a lot because I feel it's relatable to everyone and my own personal experience as well. But we see these workouts and it's like, just do this workout and you'll, get an ass or abs or
Right.
shoulders, whatever.
Right.
And they don't tell you all the things that they're doing behind the scenes in terms of their diet, in terms of their rest, in terms of how long they're doing it, in terms of what kind of, cardiovascular stuff they're also doing. And that is the same when it comes to this personal emotional development as well. You don't know all the
Mm-hmm.
things that people are doing behind the scenes when it comes to like journaling, meditation, talking to therapists, working with professionals, working with a
Yeah.
coach. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, like
Yeah.
Shannon and Josh's
Yeah.
voice notes are like blown up with my shit.
We're always curious. Listen, I want to say I saw a saying today that was like so on point to what you're saying, and it is this. I hope I get it right. We earn our trophy in practice.
Ooh,
It just gets awarded at
the
the
ceremony.
competition,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, I love that.
right?
That's good.
So, yeah. So, and PS, at practice, are we always amazing? No. Some days we
No.
show up and we suck. Some days we show up and we feel good. Some days we show up and it's a mix, right? That's reality.
Yeah.
So, let's not fool ourselves that we're supposed to know everything right
Yeah.
at the beginning. We're supposed to do it all perfectly right at the beginning. That is not true. That is not real. That is setting you up for just feeling like shit. And who
Yeah.
wants to feel like shit?
I love that. Thank you for that example. Yeah, that's so good because we see people, we're like, oh, well, I want a body like that. And they're like, just do this workout. Meanwhile, they've been doing that workout for fucking 10 years.
Right.
Like,
Right.
yeah. And I love what you said as well, that it's kind of like, yeah, we don't train for battle, or we like the battle isn't won. Like, we spend the time training like for the battle, right? Like we spend the time
Right.
like behind the scenes doing all of the shit, you know, not necessarily for like the trophy, um, but like for, the experience itself. And then as a byproduct, we get the trophy, right? Like
Right.
we don't go to the, if we go to the gym to get abs, like it's a lot harder than if you were just someone who goes to the gym and, oh, by the way, as a byproduct, you have abs. And I think that we can relate that to what you said about, yeah, the trophy is achieved. How did you say it? The trophy is achieved. Say it again.
We earn our trophy in practice.
Yes.
It's just awarded at the
Yeah.
competition.
That is so good. That is so
Yeah.
good. Like, yeah, because
Yeah.
it's not something where, yeah, like
Yeah.
we love a hero's journey and a come up and we see these successes happen for people. We're like, oh, it's so easy for them, but we again don't know what they've done behind the scenes. So I
Right.
love that. Yeah, and I love what
Right.
you said as well about like some days training doesn't look pretty. You know what I did the other day? I hit my chin doing pull-ups. If
Oh.
anyone, I mean, not to toot my own horn, but beep beep, like I'm pretty good at pull-ups. And as someone who has been, working out 5-ish times a week, for the past decade, I don't know if I've ever hit my face on a bar. I mean, I have like a barbell, but yeah, so I that exactly your comment
Oh,
about like some days we don't train so well. I'm like, yeah, I hit myself in the chin.
yeah.
Or the bar.
We're all
Yeah, so
the bar jumped out and hit you. I mean, I don't know what it
I
was
have it on
doing.
video. It's not cute. Like you see me like whack myself.
But like that is like honestly, and you're like, if anyone looked at you and saw you in the gym, they'd be like, she knows her shit, right? She
Yeah,
knows what's going on. She's done this forever. She's the person I'm going to go to when I don't know what I'm doing.
yeah,
And you still hit your chin on a bar.
yeah. And I
So
still whack
let's,
myself.
yeah. So let's stop comparing ourselves to everyone else, by the way. Let's
Yeah,
stop that.
yeah. Whew. All right,
Yeah.
good stuff. Let's talk about some steps for anyone who wants to get to what's really underneath those surface emotions, and
Hmm.
what's going on beneath those default quote unquote acceptable feelings. So,
Yeah.
what, like, how do we do it? Like, how do we've talked about the importance of, why we need to,
Right.
why it's,
Right.
instead of say you need to, you can do whatever the hell you want, but
Right.
if you want to live that
What
hashtag
would right.
best life, you want to be your best self,
Yeah.
stop
Yeah.
feeling like ugh, and not knowing why,
Right.
then
Yeah.
yeah. And I want to say that as well, because just sidebar, main bar, uh it's the cliche, but if it were easy, everyone would be doing it. Like, it's not easy, it is
No.
messy, and that's why people get on the merry-go-round of distraction and numbing. And it's not just the examples that I used: drugs, alcohol, sex, porn, or well, porn, sex, smoking, but it
Yeah.
can also be things like over exercising, overworking, these things
Mm-hmm.
that are again considered like acceptable outlets. Oh, look at your
Yeah.
dedication and determination. Meanwhile, your fucking like hormones are on zero because you're not
Mm-hmm.
actually allowing your body to rest, and like you're burnt out because you work all the time and don't have any fun. And so yeah, like, again, talking about the acceptable things, like, just be mindful of, are you again lying to yourself, right? The truth is what you believe it to be. Are you being honest with yourself?
Mm-hmm.
Or are you lying to yourself? So
Mm.
with that, how do we do it? How do we get to what's underneath the acceptable quote unquote feelings?
Well, I think, right? Um, I think the first thing that we do, which is what we do in a lot of these behaviors or habits or patterns that we're trying to change, is we have to start developing an awareness of when it's happening,
Yes.
right? Because it may happen in only certain situations with certain people. It may happen all the time. It may be something that only happens like with one little thing, right? So paying attention to when it's happening is really important. And for each person, that's going to be very unique. And also, just as a reminder, it's going to show up in your perception differently from how it's going to show up in other people's, right?
Yes.
So in my body, in my experience, when I am staying in just to keep our terminology the same, when I'm staying in surface level stuff, right?
Mhm.
But there's something else underneath. I feel it right here. I have
Mhm.
like a tightness in my chest, a
Mhm.
fluttery in my
Mhm.
chest, and I feel that all day long.
Mm.
I also notice I have all these answers in my head. I have
Mhm.
a whole situation happening up here,
Mhm.
and I never say them.
Mhm. I know that's right.
So, right? So like
Mhm.
for me, it's all of this up here and this right here. What is it for you when you notice you're in a place where you haven't gone underneath?
So thank you for sharing that and for asking, because as you were saying that, I had a flashback to when I started to, do this work. Like, I became like, pretty self-aware. And it wasn't until I moved from Florida back to North Carolina, and I noticed that when I would be around my parents, I would get really tense and I would stop talking.
Mm, mhm.
Like, John is not warm and fuzzy. I'm just gonna be honest. Like, I'm very personable. I'm very welcoming. I'm an open book. Feel free to like come say what's up. And at the same time, I would not describe me as cuddly. But at the same time, with that, it's something where I wouldn't, describe me as being like um standoffish. And what I would observe in my
Mhm,
body is that like I physically would tense up, which
mhm.
when I think about it, I've been very fortunate. Like, I had great parents. I have, a great parent. And at the same time, while there was no like, major event, there was like little t trauma where I didn't feel like, and I was always like fortunately very, safe if we look at it on paper, but something happened where I didn't feel
Mhm.
safe to like speak.
Yeah,
I think personally for me, it's because I didn't feel that they understood me. And so
yeah,
whenever I would speak, it was something where I felt the opposite of seen, known, and heard. And
right,
so my safeguard was just clam up. Like, no
right,
response is better than getting, no connection, no response is better than, as I saw it then, um, the rejection, or, feeling, like they didn't know who I was. And so I
right,
would physically just tense up because I was like, I don't know what the right move is here.
right.
And so again, nothing that like anything ever happened. And so I say that because I'm present to the fact that there are some situations where like we need professional support, we need therapists, we need, it does not feel safe, and there's a reason we can point at. But there's
Right,
also
right.
situations where you might not know like why you feel that way.
Mhm.
And the first step is just becoming aware of like what you're feeling, like not even considering the why, but like you said, that awareness component of it. So
Yes,
like I said, I
yes.
observe myself physically getting tense, and like I would be very quiet. I'm not a super talkative. I mean,
Mhm.
I say I'm not super talkative. I talk like my ass off every week, but um it's something where, I'm normally in communication, in conversation. And
You're in the moment with people.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, thank you. And I just would just clam up. And so that was
Yeah.
one thing. I wanted to share another that I noticed. And I think this is because I mentioned my default was anger.
Mhm.
Now I can tell. And it's interesting. I had a situation recently where I was mad as fuck, but I have the awareness to like, I didn't throw things, I didn't scream, I didn't yell. My heart rate was like beating. I was clearly alert and like pissed. And at the same
Mhm.
time, I was mindful enough to know, like, okay, this response is happening. And again, like I've been in training. So
Mhm.
it wasn't something
Mhm.
where I felt like, or I knew that like flying off the handle and wasting that energy, as I see it, um, that exertion of energy was not like worth it for me. And so it was, how can I channel this better? My man, Rage Against the Machine, Zach De La Roca, your anger is a gift. And so oftentimes whenever
Mhm.
we are feeling that, right? And I would like to reframe it a bit and consider like your feelings are a gift, like they are messengers, they are telling you
Yes.
something. And so
Yes.
considering like what it is and how you can transmute it and leverage it, right?
Yes.
Is that a conversation? Is that you diverting your attention from the situation and focusing on something else? Is it you using that energy to dig deeper, to say like, I'm tired of feeling like this, I want to get to the bottom of this, what's underneath it?
Yes.
Because when we do that, that is when we are, put at a different vantage point and empowered to actually, you know build resilience and understand like what it is that we need to do so that we can have more success and not experience the same thing again, so that we can get a little bit better and a little bit better and a little bit better. And that's how you
Mhm.
start to become, more self-aware. That's how you build resilience. That's how you learn more about who you are. That's how you connect with others, because whenever you open up your capacity to feel different feelings, you are actually opening up your potential to understand when others are expressing those same feelings, because
Yeah.
what you see in them is what you know to be true and recognize as something that is within yourself. So
Yeah.
uh
Yeah.
that was a long ass response to say
Win,
that
win, win. Yeah.
shutting down completely is
Yeah.
one physical response that I notice in my awareness. And then number two, the anger. Like
Mhm.
it'll just be like a deep, like I get quiet, I get very tense. So okay, similar
Mhm.
responses, which I didn't recognize until now. Like I get like my body gets tense and I get quiet.
Mhm.
And whether that's because I'm like shutting down, assessing the situation, like I don't feel safe here, or because I'm mad as fuck,
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
depends. But that's interesting that, yeah, the physical response is the same. And sometimes I feel um nervous, like that feeling like the pit of your tummy when you're like,
Mhm.
oh, like,
Mhm.
yeah, sometimes
Mhm.
I feel that. But yeah, so
Yeah.
those are three
That
things that I feel. Three awarenesses
that
there.
really interesting. Really interesting. Very different from me. And very, very interesting that you have similar reactions physically to different emotions
Yeah.
that are part of that experience.
Yeah.
And I love that you already started bringing us to the next part of this process, which is what are you going to do with that, right? Once you start paying attention to what is happening when, let's give some attention to other ways to cope with those things,
Yes.
right? You already identified you want to sort of take it and transmute it into something, right? Leverage it for yourself. So talk to us about some thoughts you have there. What are some ideas you have, or how can we start looking at that?
So thank you for asking. Josh Britnell and I had this realization. This is one of my voice notes to him, when I was going through everything in December with my mother passing away.
Mhm.
And I was like, wow, the way that I'm coping with this now is miles away from how younger Jonna would have coped with this, right? So younger Jonna would have distracted, numbed out, like drank herself until like she didn't feel the feels anymore. What I was doing this time is I allowed this experience to break me whole ass open. And so the way that I did that is with better coping strategies. So what did I do? I continued to move. Movement is the quickest way to show your brain and body that you are in control, whether that be through breathing, whether that be through stretching, yoga, whether that be through, slamming weights around and listening to Rage Against the Machine. Like moving shows your body that like, no, like I'm running the show. Like emotional brain, like thank you for your input. We hear you, we see you, and at the same time, not going to let you rule the show right now. And
Right.
so the way that we do that is, yeah, by developing better strategies. I also really leaned on community like I never have before. I made sure to do the thing. So I call this like your formula, like figuring out your formula. And so I know that like I need a good playlist. I know that I need some form of movement. I know that I need to brain dump, get all my thoughts out, spend a little time alone, just thinking about what those thoughts mean to me. And if it feels like something that is needed, reach out to people, which I'm working on, because like I said, that's not familiar to me. And so reaching out to people, like I used to see it as an annoyance, like leave me the fuck alone. Of course I'm fine. Like go away, like kind of a thing. And after, years of this, I'm like, oh, that's me trying to keep myself safe because I don't trust them. I don't trust them to like not let me down. And so that's what I mean when I say these people are playing a role, right? All these people that reached out and checked on me, I'm gonna start crying, throughout the years in different times were playing a role where I like, what was my reaction to that? Like, was I trying to push them away or was I opening the door? And so the more I learned about that, the more I learned, oh, well, it's not because they're annoying and because they're like overbearing and because like they're all up in my business. I'm not saying that that's not why some people don't do that shit, but
Sure.
that it's something for me where I was like, oh, it's because they care and this is a shitty situation and they're present to that, but I'm not, because what's safe for me is distracting from it. And so that was a long-winded answer on that as well, to say that better coping strategies just look like ways in order for you to feel the feelings below the surface feels, right? Below those initial, like the anger, the frustration, the sadness, like to feel those feelings in a way that enables you to start to understand them and get curious about like what they're telling you. And so that's what we mean by better coping strategies. And it might look different for everyone. I know that Shannon, you like yoga. Correct me if I'm wrong. And like, yoga for me, I'm like, I need like some ED and some barbells, like totally different. But both are examples of better coping strategies than, let's say, just numbing, distracting, getting on that merry-go-round and like not looking at the stuff. That's what I would say. Do you have anything to add to that?
I love, thank you for sharing all the ways that you've learned to build your formula, right?
Yeah.
For coping. And I want to sort of side note say that, correct me if I'm wrong, that's taken some time, trial and error, right?
R&D.
Right? Figuring out what makes you feel better. And oftentimes, okay, because of how we're these physiological beings with all this other stuff, emotional, psychological stuff happening, we have to get at the relief from all those different channels.
Right.
So that's why movement works, right? Because when I was talking about energy and that trapping of energy, movement releases energy.
Yeah.
That's why some people, I'm not this person, but some people are like, I am so frustrated. I just feel off. I'm going to go take a run.
I knew you were going to say running.
I am not a runner. Never have been, except in 7th grade when I was on the track team. But like that works because, right? And so whatever it looks like to you, think about that, right? Number one, know that it's going to take some trial and error. Number one, two, like it could be as simple as dancing, like close the door to your room, turn on your favorite song, dance, sing. Like if music is your jam, do something with that. If if there's a sport you like to play, go play the sport. I mean, I know this sounds silly, but it's actually simple. It's a simple, easy way to look at it. And then what you will find is as you clear the energy, therapist once told me this. This is like old school. Did you ever go to the cafeteria where the trays, you'd take one and then another one would pop up? And then you
Oh
take
yeah, yeah,
another
yeah.
tray and another one pop up? Your trays will start to rise.
Mm,
What's underneath will come up because you cleared that one on top.
mm-hmm,
And then you
mm-hmm,
clear the other. It will come. It may feel weird.
mm-hmm.
That's okay.
It probably will feel weird. We're just gonna throw that out there.
Yeah.
Probably will feel weird. If you've never
Yeah.
felt it before, anything you've never done before is going to feel weird.
Yeah.
But just as you've gotten familiar with anything else, you can get familiar with this. And so the more you do it, the more resilience you build and the more like you rinse and repeat that process. You
Yeah.
talking about movement also reminded me of our conversation moving your way to inner trust, because something that I
Mm-hmm.
think is important as well when it comes to movement is we are teaching our bodies and brains how to deal with stress responses, because whenever we are moving and our hearts are pounding or quickness or shortness of breath, those are also the things that we experience while working out, but also oftentimes whenever we're experiencing some
Yeah.
type of an emotional response. And so whenever
Yeah.
you are in a controlled environment and you're training your body that, hey, this is okay, in a workout or in a movement, when you're like dancing or when you're doing like going for a run, for our runners out there, more power to you, then you are building resilience in your body to deal with those uncontrollable circumstance when you start to feel
Right.
those same physiological sensations. And so yeah, love movement. That was a better coping strategy. And another thing that we touched on is self-regulation and how to do that, which is similar to the coping strategies,
Yeah.
in the sense that similar, a little bit different. Coping, this is how we navigate it, what we do, how we deal with it. Self-regulating, this is how you calm yourself down, right? Like this is
Right.
how you, like I mentioned in the cigarette example. So if you go for a cigarette, try just breathing. That type of breathing, like box breathing, is one way of doing it. There are a shit ton of apps now,
Yeah.
different types
Yeah.
of breathing that you can do to like regulate your nervous system and calm you down. And so that's one way to self-regulate. Grounding techniques, just naming items in the room, is another
Mm-hmm.
way, because what happens, and I want to, not take all the time and hear what you have to say on this, but when we are in a stress response, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, it's something where our limbic emotional brain, the oldest part of our brain, takes over, and it's like, shit's going down, we need to do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
you have your neocortex to use your discernment between like, okay, that was like a previous experience where things were bad, this is a different experience, we're not sure what all the details are, so that you can bring that neocortex back online. And the way you do that is through logical like thinking. And so that might look like we were saying, reciting facts. That might look like saying items in the, or like naming items in the room, like I see Mr. T, like I see like a nail file. That might look like playing brain games. Like I'm a big fan of playing Lumosity, like free
Mm-hmm.
brain games. I love that thing.
Mm-hmm.
You can also like tell a story, like a happy story, to like recount, like to start to
Mm-hmm.
bring back on that part of your brain so that you can calm yourself down and self-regulate in that way. There's also
Mm-hmm.
a co-regulation technique, and you might know this because we were in the same life coaching certification,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
someone had told their friend, like if the friend observed, so like if I observed, or if you observed me starting to get agitated, you would know to ask me about my favorite TV show. I don't watch TV, I don't own a television, but this was the example. Like you would
Mm-hmm.
ask me, so you would ask me facts about Rage Against the Machine, and I'd be like, oh my god.
Exactly. Exactly. I would know that. Yes.
Let me tell you.
Yes.
But that is an example of co-regulation. If there's someone that knows you, if there's someone that you feel safe with, that is around you a lot, that can support you in that way. So
Yeah.
that's what I have to say about that. What do you have to say?
I don't think I can add much to that. I would just say that regulation is also something that it will take time to learn
Yes.
what works for you. So it is a practice, and what works for you in some settings will not work for you in others.
Yes.
So you may be like in a crowded room. For me, for some, a lot of times for people, having a lot of people around, particularly post-COVID, it's a really
Mm,
challenging set of sort of inputs to manage. That's a perfect example of needing to regulate, right?
yeah.
To slow yourself down enough so that you can process the information coming to you in an appropriate way instead of an activated or sort of overactive way.
Yeah.
Um, that's first of all normal. That's second of all what our brains want us to do.
Yeah.
So just know that that's a practice. And also, I will say that that our triggers for what we need when, maybe think of it just simply as my awareness is on this
Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't feel that good. I'm
Mm-hmm.
really in my body right now, or I'm in my brain right now, or whatever it might be. And if I changed my awareness to the other thing, would that feel better?
I like that.
So sometimes people talk about mindfulness. I have a friend who teaches mindfulness and she talks about it as an awareness practice
Mm-hmm.
instead of mindfulness, because that's really what allows us to shift to what's happening. Like you were saying, stating facts, looking around your room is being aware.
Yeah.
So I just offer that as an entry point.
I love that. Those are great. And yeah, I love what you mentioned as well. Like what works, it's a process, and what works now
Mm-hmm.
might not work the next time, might not work in certain situations. One of the things that I do with my clients, my program, is I have them, before we start to do a lot of the deep
Mm-hmm.
dive, is to create their self-regulation toolkit so that they know. So they won't be in the moment like, oh, fuck, what do I do?
Yes.
So that they'll be in the moment starting to realize, oh, I'm noticing them agitated. Let me pull up my self-regulation toolkit and try these things. And so it's not like one or two things. They have a fucking list so that they
Yeah.
know, like, oh, if that doesn't work, cool, let me try this other thing, so that you can see what works, and so that you can do R&D and remember, oh, well, like I was triggered by this, this time. And like, let's say I was triggered by my boss asking me to stay late this time, and this coping technique or this regulation technique really worked there. I'll try
Mm-hmm.
that next time when I'm in a similar situation. Like this is
Right.
how we start to like learn and like refine. Um,
Right.
so yeah,
Right.
love that.
Yeah.
Okay, we have covered a
Woo.
lot.
We have.
I think it's been great stuff. We have talked about what the quote unquote acceptable feelings are. We've talked about why those are quote unquote acceptable. And we've talked about what it looks like in real time, why it can be harmful to not dig deeper, and
Mm-hmm.
how we can actually start to dig deeper and look at the things that are underneath those initial default go-tos. What would you say, like, are your final words, key takeaways on what we had to say today?
I would say that if any of this resonated with you, yay, first of all. Thank you for listening, because this is actually kind of complicated. And our intention in this conversation was to normalize, right? Was to say, listen, everybody, like this happens to a lot of us,
Yeah.
and it's okay. And in that reassurance, I want to remind everyone to stay curious, to step away from judgment, because when we are learning something new, it is very easy to go back to our default voice in our head that says something negative about ourselves. And that's not, that voice isn't true. You are doing really hard things, and you deserve to acknowledge that that's taking strength, that's taking grit, and that's taking choice.
Yeah.
And that will pay off. You're earning your trophy.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, give
You're
yourself
welcome.
grace and
Yeah.
know that this isn't easy, and know that we're here to help. So
Yeah,
that's why we do what we
absolutely.
do. That's why we're sharing the shit that we wish someone had told us. So, like we said, we don't have to figure this out the hard way, because
Yeah.
the hard way sucks. Um,
Yeah. It really
so
does.
it
It really
does.
does. Yeah.
So, all right. Thank you for being here. Where can they find you, and what do you have going on?
You all can find me, as Jonna said at the top of the episode, on my website, powerplacepurpose.com. You can also find me on Instagram, power.place.purpose. I mainly do one-on-one coaching sessions with individual clients. So you can find me through any of those resources I just shared, and reach out, send me a message. I offer a free consultation call. No pressure, just you and me talking to figure out where you're at and where you might want to be, and if I can help you. What about you, Jonna?
I will make sure to link. Thank you for asking. I will share it. First, I want to say I will link all of your details in the description. So just tap on over. If you're not following Shanon already, please do. And any time of hers is a true gift. And so if she's offering it, I mean, I suggest you take it, but you do what feels good to you. So thank you for asking. I am here every Monday with a new episode, and then we will be going live for the after party on Friday. And so yeah, you can find me on Instagram at Hey Jonna Renee, and you can also find me online at whenselfhelpisn'thelping.com, just all spelled out, because one of the things that we spoke to in this episode is that, you know, the ability to go deep really requires you knowing who you are and what that sense of self is, and learning how to, regulate that. And so that's exactly what I do with my clients in my program. I work with them one-on-one. You get video content that teaches you, like I said, the self-regulation toolkit and how to find your formula and how to actually get metrics on, your feelings so that you can track them throughout our time working together, so that you can see your progress, you can see what worked, you can see what didn't. And if anyone is interested, I'm opening for end of summer enrollment. So make sure to head to the link in the description, or the link in my bio, or you can also slide into my messages, and I'll be happy to support you there with more information in what that looks like. And I also offer a free self-help strategy session where we take what the self-help means and we really break it down and figure out how you can make it work for you, because that's why these cookie cutter life hacks and responses and things don't always work, or might work for a little while and they stop, because you're taking, these logical, like practical solutions, and you are applying them what is typically adaptive behaviors, and like you're trying to like make that outfit fit on something that it wasn't, custom tailored for. So that's what I've got going on. Thank you for asking. What we have for this episode and for you watching and listening this week is polls are going to be coming out on Wednesday, because we want to hear about your experience with the quote unquote acceptable feelings and how that's landed for you, what those feelings were. So make sure to head over to, like I said, my stories on Instagram at Hey Jonna Renee on Wednesday for those. And on Friday, we're going to be going live to recap this episode, to share what you had to say in those poll results, to answer any and all questions that you have on the topic, and to get to know Shanon a little bit better. And that's again on Friday at 9 a.m. Eastern. So you get to have coffee with us if you would like.
Yay!
So make sure to join us for that. And if this episode was helpful at all in any way, if it resonated, please, please, please do share it with someone who needs to hear it as well. Help them by sharing some shit that, you wish that someone would have told you, or that we wish that someone would have told us, so that, they don't have to find out the hard way, and so that they can hear it here before it gets to that point that we mentioned of like, oh fuck, like shit is hitting the fan, I need to do something. So do please share it. It helps us. And let us know if you would like what resonated most, and what those feelings were that we asked about in the beginning. Like, what are those feelings that you were taught were acceptable and, normal? So let us know. We'll be asking again those in the polls. You can let us know right here, right now, if you want to slide into our DMs, because we're just here to help. So that's what I have to say.
Always. Yes. Thank you for this time. And we look forward to continuing the conversation all week.
Thank you. Yes, I'm excited. We will see you on the screens. Until then, take care, and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
Bye.